Everyone in the office had watched the CEO's son humiliate her in public. What he mistook for a victory, however, was already beginning to look like the most expensive mistake of his career. By late Monday afternoon, the 42nd floor of Halston and Reed had the polished silence of a place where people had learned to hide their opinions behind glass walls and professional smiles. Rain pressed against the windows, turning the city beyond them into a gray blur of towers, traffic lights, and wet rooftops. Inside, phones rang softly, keyboards clicked, and every conversation seemed to lower in volume whenever Adrian Halston crossed the room. At 28, he had the title of Vice President of Operations, a corner office he had not earned, and the particular confidence of someone who had never been forced to wonder whether a door would open for him. He was the CEO's son, though no one said it aloud. Officially, his promotion had been described as part of a new leadership transition. Unofficially, everyone knew what it was: nepotism dressed in a tailored suit. In 3 weeks, Adrian had changed reporting structures, canceled long-standing vendor meetings, and introduced a performance system no one understood. Each time the confusion spread, employees quietly repaired the damage after he left. Claire Bennett was usually the one who found the loose threads before the whole fabric came apart. Claire had spent 11 years at Halston and Reed. She had joined when the company occupied only 3 floors, and the executive team still ate lunch in the same break room as everyone else. Now she managed executive operations, which meant she knew where every important decision began, where it could fail, and who would be blamed when it did. She remembered contract deadlines without checking a calendar, knew which clients required legal review before a promise was made, and could calm a furious department head with 3 precise questions. She was not intimidating, but she was difficult to manipulate. That morning, while reviewing a staffing proposal, she discovered that Adrian planned to eliminate 32 support positions by the end of the month. There was no cost analysis, no approval from human resources, no legal review, and no authorization from the board. Worse, the draft announcement had already been prepared. Claire carried the documents into Adrian's office and closed the door behind her. "You can't announce this today," she said calmly. "The board approved a hiring freeze, not layoffs." Adrian barely looked up from his laptop. "I know what the board approved." Claire placed the relevant page beside his hand. "Then you know this requires written authorization." For a moment his expression remained blank. Then he smiled, slow and thin. "Thank you, Claire. I'll take it from here." She left the office believing she had prevented a serious mistake. What she had actually done was bruise his pride. The weekly operations meeting began at 3:30 in the main conference room, a long chamber of smoked glass and dark wood overlooking the rain-soaked city. 23 managers sat around the table, while several junior employees stood along the walls with tablets and notebooks. Adrian arrived 8 minutes late, carrying no documents and wearing the relaxed expression of a man who expected the room to adjust itself around him. Claire sat near the far end beside Elena Morris, the HR director. The first part of the meeting was ordinary: quarterly numbers, a delayed software rollout, a vendor dispute, 2 regional vacancies. Then Adrian leaned back in his chair and announced that the support division would lose 32 positions before the end of the month. He said it casually, almost proudly, as if cutting people from a spreadsheet were proof of courage. The room became still. Elena turned toward him. Claire noticed one manager staring down at his notes, another pressing his lips together. No one wanted to be the first person to challenge the CEO's son. Claire waited 2 seconds, hoping Elena would speak. When she did not, Claire folded her hands on the table. "That action has not completed the required review," she said. "We need approval from HR, legal, and the board before any announcement is made." Adrian looked at her slowly. "Are you correcting me again?" His tone was light, but the question changed the temperature in the room. The rain ticked against the windows like a clock counting down. Claire kept her voice even. I'm confirming company procedure. Without review, this could create legal and financial exposure. Adrian gave a short laugh and glanced around the table, waiting for someone to join him. No one did. This is exactly the problem, he said. Some employees become so comfortable that they confuse experience with authority. Claire felt the insult land, but she did not allow it to shape her face. My responsibility is to prevent avoidable risk. Adrian leaned forward. Your responsibility is to support leadership. Claire met his eyes. Supporting leadership does not mean ignoring policy. The silence that followed was complete. Adrian stood and buttoned his jacket. Through the glass walls, employees in the open office had begun to look toward the conference room. He noticed them, and something in his posture changed. His voice grew louder. Claire Bennett, your employment is terminated effective immediately. Elena straightened in her chair. Adrian, this has not been reviewed by HR. He raised one hand without looking at her. I'm making an executive decision. The words sounded impressive only because he said them loudly. Claire understood what was happening. This was not a private personnel action. It was a public firing staged to impress the office. A display of executive abuse meant to warn anyone who might challenge him next. Adrian continued. Security will collect your access card. You may gather your belongings under supervision. Several people looked away. One manager's face tightened with anger, but he said nothing. Adrian had mistaken their silence for respect. Claire closed the folder in front of her and rose slowly. Her heart was pounding, and heat burned behind her eyes, but she refused to give Adrian the emotional scene he wanted. Please provide the reason for termination in writing, she said, and preserve all records connected to the proposed layoffs and today's meeting. For the first time, Adrian's confidence flickered. Only briefly, but Claire saw it. So did Elena. Claire had not threatened anyone. She had simply reminded the room that words left evidence behind. Then she walked out of the conference room beneath the gaze of the entire floor. The distance to her desk felt longer than 11 years. People pretended to work, but their hands barely moved. Maya, Claire's assistant, stood beside the desk with tears in her eyes. I'm sorry, she whispered. Claire gave her a small smile. You have nothing to apologize for. She packed only a framed photograph of her mother, a ceramic mug painted with uneven blue stars, and the fountain pen the founder had given her after her 5th anniversary. Security never arrived. Adrian had apparently been too busy performing the firing to call them. Claire placed her access card beside the keyboard and pulled on her coat. Around her, the office remained silent, but it was no longer the silence Adrian had wanted. It was heavier now, filled with discomfort, anger, and memory. 23 managers had heard him. HR had objected. The documents existed. As Claire reached the elevator, her phone vibrated. A message had arrived from a board member who had never contacted her directly before. She read it once, then again. Don't sign anything tonight. The elevator doors opened, but Claire did not step inside immediately. Somewhere behind the smoked glass, a meeting door closed, and for the first time that day, Adrian was no longer the only person making decisions. The rain had not stopped by the time Claire Bennett reached the parking garage. Water drummed against the concrete ceiling while the city disappeared behind a curtain of gray. She sat inside her car without starting the engine, her employee badge resting in her hand. 11 years of arriving before sunrise and leaving after sunset had ended with a sentence spoken in front of 23 managers. For a brief moment, anger tried to take control. Then training, experience, and instinct replaced it. Claire knew something many people forgot in emotional moments. The first hours after a wrongful termination often mattered more than the lawsuit that might never come. People rewrote memories, Emails disappeared, calendars changed, servers were cleaned. If today's events were ever questioned, facts would have to survive longer than opinions. She opened her notebook and began writing everything she could remember while every detail was still fresh. The exact time Adrian announced the layoffs, the names of everyone present, Elena Morris objecting from Human Resources, the wording Adrian had used before firing her, the absence of any written notice, the lack of HR approval. She even noted where people had been sitting around the conference table. It felt almost mechanical, but she had learned years ago that precise facts carried more weight than emotional recollections. When she finished, she photographed every page and saved copies to secure cloud storage before driving home through streets blurred by rain. Across town, the atmosphere inside Halston and Reed had changed completely. The office looked the same, but the conversations were different. Nobody discussed quarterly reports anymore. Instead, people whispered in kitchens, hallways, and private chat channels that management officially discouraged but never managed to eliminate. Some employees believed Claire would never return. Others quietly admitted they had never seen anyone dismissed so publicly without HR leading the process. By 6 o'clock, Elena Morris had received 3 confidential messages from managers asking the same question in different words. Was that even legal? She could not answer them yet. She simply replied that every employment action would be reviewed according to company policy. Adrian, meanwhile, interpreted the silence as victory. He called several department directors into his office, one after another. His instructions sounded polite, but everyone understood what he expected. If anyone asks, he said, today's decision was based on repeated resistance to executive direction. I assume we're all aligned. Nobody openly argued. Most nodded, thanked him for the clarification, and left. Yet once outside his office, none of them looked relieved. They looked worried. Adrian believed authority could shape memory. The people leaving his office knew memory had already been recorded by too many witnesses. Near 7 that evening, Adrian requested access to several internal planning documents connected to the proposed layoffs. He wanted the draft announcement revised before the following morning. When an operations analyst informed him that certain files had automatically entered legal retention because Human Resources had opened an internal employment review, irritation replaced his confidence for the first time that day. What do you mean they're locked? The system won't allow edits after the retention flag, the analyst answered carefully. Only legal can authorize changes. Adrian frowned. Call IT. Within minutes, someone from information technology joined the call. The answer remained the same. The activity logs can't be deleted or rewritten. Every version has already been archived. The room became uncomfortably quiet. No one accused Adrian of doing anything wrong. No one needed to. The technology itself had answered his question. At home, Claire placed a folder on her dining table and continued organizing everything connected to the day's events. Employment agreements, board memorandums, the staffing freeze approved 2 weeks earlier, calendar invitations, meeting agendas, email confirmations. She was not preparing for a lawsuit. She was preparing for questions. If the company chose to investigate honestly, she wanted every answer supported by documentation rather than emotion. Shortly after 8, another message appeared on her phone. This one came from Elena. I can't discuss details, just don't delete anything. Keep every email. Claire read it twice before locking the screen. She was no longer the only person preserving evidence. The following hour brought another unexpected development inside Halston and Reed. Members of the legal department received 2 anonymous reports through the company's ethics hotline. Neither complaint mentioned Claire by name. Instead, both described a public termination that appeared to bypass established corporate procedure. One report questioned whether executives had exceeded their authority. The other asked whether witnesses should be interviewed before records changed. Company policy required every ethics complaint involving senior leadership to be forwarded automatically to the office of the CEO and to the chair of the board. No announcements were made, no emergency meetings were scheduled, yet invisible processes had already begun moving beneath the polished surface of the company. Around 9:30, Elena finally shut down her computer. Before leaving, she noticed an unread notification marked with the highest internal priority. It had not come from human resources. It had come from executive administration. She opened the message. Subject: Schedule update. CEO Michael Halston will return to headquarters tomorrow morning. Executive attendance required. Elena stared at the screen. The CEO had not been expected back until Thursday. She closed her laptop without another word. The next morning, employees arrived earlier than usual. Nobody admitted why. Conversations stopped whenever the elevator indicators changed floors. At exactly 8:02 a.m., the private executive elevator descended into the lobby. The doors slid open. A man in a dark overcoat stepped out, carrying a single leather briefcase. No greeting, no security announcement, no smile. Only the unmistakable presence of Michael Halston. And suddenly, everyone who had been certain the previous day was over realized it had only just begun. Before we continue, if you're enjoying this story and want to see what happens when the truth finally reaches the people who actually have the power to act, take a second to subscribe to the channel. New stories like this are released every week, and your support helps us keep creating them. Now tell me this. What would you have done if you had witnessed Claire's public firing? Would you have spoken up or stayed silent to protect your own job? Leave your answer in the comments. Now, let's get back to the story. By 8:15 a.m., the atmosphere inside Halston and Reed felt completely different from the previous afternoon. Conversations ended the moment Michael Halston walked onto the executive floor. Unlike his son, he didn't make speeches or greet anyone. He simply looked around the office, noticing the tense faces, the unusual silence, and the way employees avoided eye contact. His first instruction was brief. Nobody leaves. Nobody changes company records. Every manager stays available. Within minutes, human resources, legal, and internal audit were gathered in the executive conference room. Adrian entered confidently, convinced he could explain everything before anyone else spoke. It was a performance issue, he began. Claire had become increasingly difficult to manage and openly challenged executive decisions. Michael didn't respond. Instead, he slid a legal pad across the table. Write down every incident. Adrian hesitated. There have been several. Good, Michael replied calmly. Writing them down shouldn't take long. The room fell silent. For the next 2 hours, Michael spoke with employees one at a time. No group meetings, no discussions. Every witness entered alone. Elena Morris from HR confirmed she had objected before the termination. The operations director stated that no board approval existed for the proposed layoffs. The IT manager explained that all document activity had been preserved automatically and that no records had been altered after the legal retention hold was activated. No one exaggerated, no one attacked Adrian personally. They simply described what they had seen. Meanwhile, Adrian sat in his office, watching people disappear into the conference room, one after another. For the first time since becoming vice president, nobody came to ask his permission for anything. Nobody updated him. Nobody even told him what was being said. Around noon, Michael finally called Adrian back inside. Have you reached a decision? Adrian asked. Michael closed the folder in front of him. No. Adrian looked relieved. His father continued. I've heard enough to know there are serious inconsistencies. Adrian leaned forward. So Claire is lying? Michael's expression didn't change. I didn't say that. A long silence followed. Then the CEO spoke again. "From this moment forward, you will not contact any employee about yesterday's meeting." Adrian frowned. "Why?" "Because every witness deserves to speak without influence." The words landed harder than any accusation. Outside the conference room, employees noticed something unusual. Claire's office had not been reassigned. Her computer had not been removed. Even her nameplate remained beside the door. No one understood what it meant. Some believed it was an oversight. Others wondered if someone had quietly ordered that nothing be touched. Late that afternoon, Michael met privately with the company's general counsel and the chair of the board. The meeting lasted nearly an hour. When the door finally opened, no one smiled. No announcements followed. No one was fired. No one was reinstated. As employees left for the evening, uncertainty had replaced fear. The investigation was no longer about one public firing. It had become a question of how the company itself had been run. And before the board reached its conclusion, more than one career was about to be examined. The investigation continued behind closed doors. Legal reviewed Adrian's emails, his layoff proposal, and every message sent after Claire's dismissal. Human Resources reopened earlier complaints connected to his management style. Managers were asked to submit written statements, and each interview was conducted separately. Very quickly, a pattern began to emerge. Adrian had announced layoffs before receiving board approval. He had publicly dismissed Claire without following company procedure. Several witnesses confirmed that after the meeting, he pressured managers to support his version of events, instead of describing what had actually happened. Then the investigators looked further back. 3 months earlier, a department manager had reported being threatened after questioning one of Adrian's decisions. Another employee described being humiliated during a leadership meeting. At the time, neither complaint had moved forward because no one wanted to challenge the CEO's son. Now the atmosphere was different. Employees who had remained silent for months finally spoke. One manager admitted he had stayed quiet during Claire's firing because he believed disagreeing with Adrian would destroy his career. Another confessed that everyone in leadership had learned to avoid confronting him, even when they knew he was wrong. Michael Halston listened to every statement without interruption. He asked short questions, he requested dates, he compared timelines. When two witnesses described the same moment differently, he asked for clarification instead of making assumptions. By late afternoon, legal placed a complete investigation file in front of the board of directors. The file included witness statements, internal emails, HR records, meeting notes, and a detailed timeline of everything that had happened before and after Claire's termination. The room remained silent as board members turned page after page. No one rushed to speak. Across the hallway, Adrian waited alone. Every few minutes, he looked toward the conference room, hoping someone would call him inside. No one did. For the first time since becoming vice president, he had no control over what was happening. Claire, meanwhile, knew almost nothing about the investigation. She had spent the day answering a few additional questions from legal and then returned home, convinced that whatever happened next was now completely out of her hands. As evening approached, Michael gathered the investigation files and stood. "The fact-finding process is complete," he said calmly. "The board will now review everything before any decision is made." No one argued. No one celebrated. The conference room doors closed. Outside, the entire company waited. Inside, the future of two careers was about to be decided. The following morning, every member of the executive leadership team was asked to attend a special board meeting. No one knew the agenda, but everyone understood that the investigation had reached its final stage. Claire arrived a few minutes early, walking through the lobby with the same quiet confidence she had shown the day she left the building. Employees noticed her. exchanging uncertain glances. Some offered polite smiles, while others simply lowered their eyes, still ashamed that they had remained silent. Adrian entered shortly afterward. The confidence that had filled the boardroom days earlier had disappeared, replaced by visible tension. When everyone had taken their seats, Michael Halston stood at the head of the table. He thanked the board, legal, and human resources for completing a thorough investigation before speaking in a calm, steady voice. The board has reviewed every witness statement, every internal record, and every recommendation submitted during this investigation. Our decision is unanimous. He turned toward Claire and slid a document across the table. Ms. Bennett, your termination violated company policy. It was carried out without proper authority, without due process, and without factual justification. On behalf of Halston and Reed, I offer you a formal apology. Claire accepted the letter quietly. Effective immediately, you are reinstated as Executive Director of Operations with full salary, benefits, and uninterrupted continuity of employment. A wave of relief passed through the room. Several managers who had watched her dismissal in silence finally looked up, knowing the company had corrected a serious injustice. Michael then shifted his attention to Adrian. The room immediately fell silent again. The investigation also concluded that you exceeded your authority, ignored established procedures, attempted to influence witnesses, and abused your executive position. Adrian leaned forward, trying to interrupt, but Michael stopped him before he could speak. Today, I am addressing you as Chief Executive Officer, not as your father. He placed a second document on the table. Effective immediately, your employment with Halston and Reed is terminated. No one applauded, no one celebrated. Adrian stared at the termination letter for several seconds before quietly asking, "You'd fire your own son?" Michael held his gaze without hesitation. "I would hold every employee to the same standard." Realizing there was nothing left to argue, Adrian slowly stood, picked up the letter, and walked toward the door. Before leaving, he looked back at Claire, expecting satisfaction or revenge. She offered neither. She simply met his eyes with calm professionalism, the same dignity she had shown when he had fired her. After the door closed, the silence in the boardroom felt different. It was no longer filled with fear, but with relief. Michael looked around the table before speaking one final time. Leadership is not a privilege. It is a responsibility. If we expect integrity from every employee, we must demand even more from those who lead them. No one disagreed because every person in the room understood that the company's future had just changed. Later that afternoon, Claire returned to her office. Her nameplate still hung beside the door, her desk had been carefully preserved, and a handwritten note rested on the keyboard. It contained only 2 words: "Welcome back." She smiled quietly before sitting down and looking through the office window. Outside, phones rang, meetings continued, and employees returned to work as if it were an ordinary day. But everyone knew something important had changed forever. They had witnessed that titles could be inherited, but respect had to be earned. The end.